All right, Isha, you ready to start?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Not sure how many of you guys are here since long intro, but that's fine. We're just gonna go ahead and get started. Hello. Welcome to Social Hack. Thank you so much for coming out here on a weekend. I know spending some time in front of Zoom or YouTube is very precious time. So we want to make the most of it here today. Just to give you a little bit of background history on Social Hack, it started with a workshop hosted by Mia, like when I was a freshman, and it's really developed since then. In the past year, we've been trying to scale it to a conference. Last year, Ajita Saini, our president, was really ambitious, and we had this whole conference planned out. But unfortunately, of course, the pandemic happened, and so I wanted to continue with the work. So today we're trying to teach you a little bit about human-centered design, but more than that, it's the mindsets behind doing a social impact work, doing work that relates to people, because I really think that any work that's related to humans is going to socially impact you somehow. And so today, I didn't want you to spend a whole weekend doing a project. That's a lot. And so we're really going to be spending time understanding how we think and thinking about why and how we do things before we get our hands on anything. All right, to give you an introduction, my name is Angela, and today here with me is Isha. We're from a nonprofit student-led organization called Design for America, which is an organization on the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign campus, if you don't go here. And our club is just really dedicated to teaching human-centered design to our own members through projects, often with our community, but sometimes nationwide. Our members are interdisciplinary, and we are part of a nationwide network of over 40 studios, I think, across the United States, and our national headquarters is based in Northwestern. So as I said, my name is Angela. I've been with DFA for the past 4 years, worked at the New Siebel Center for Design, and I'm really excited to share everything we have for you today. All of our speakers are amazing, and it's really a magical experience to be able to learn from them. So before we get started, we would like to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that we are on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territories of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry these stories of the nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land-grant institution, especially the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the growth and people of these lands, as well as the history and of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the last 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on them and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is the start as we move forward in the next 150 years. Oh, let me restart that. If you're here today, if you're here right now, I would love you to drop a hello into the chat and introduce yourself a little bit. I highly encourage you go to nativeland.ca to check out where you are and who were the original people of the lands you are currently. I personally am from the California Bay Area. I know some of you might all be in Champaign, but if you're not, I encourage you to see where you are. And the territories that I live on at home are from the Lishan Ohlone peoples. There's a lot of great Native organizations out there doing rematriation work and taking care of the land, as well as doing restoring of their culture. All right, so a little bit about our intent and the goals of what we are going to be doing today. So was not going to host a whole hackathon, but then again, it's a lot of energy. But so today is really about education, about what design thinking is and what it can be for the future. And next is safe participation. So we have theory and then we need to put it into practice. And this should be a safe place for you to be able to interact with the topics, learn about navigating people. We need to think about, we have to practice talking critically about applying what we've learned and discussions and using it in various contexts. So I'd like to thank our sponsors very briefly. We have been getting grants from the Student Sustainability Committee. As we know, everything's tied to the earth. Everything is tied to how we affect our community and also the land that we're on. So it's really important to think of those connections. And with design thinking and even more systems thinking, I have learned really everything is connected. And Aditi will be talking about that in her workshop on Sunday. But second, I'd like to also thank Jerry Fiedler and Melissa Alden from the Fiedler Endowment. They have created this fellowship that's helped many people on this campus, myself included. All right, Isha.
So it's for today's schedule and tomorrow's schedule. We will have speakers from 9 to 12 p.m. and we will have breaks, so you're not continuously sitting on Zoom. And then workshops will follow at 1:30 to 3:30. And then on the next slide, we have a more specific breakdown of the schedule. All talks will be recorded and sent out if you miss anything. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are supposed to be on the live stream right now, but there's some issue with the current link. On the next slide, I'll be talking about scholarships. All scholarships are generously funded by Fiedler, and we have Donna here to talk more about Fiedler Endowment.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. And thank you, Angela and Esha, and all of you ambitious, creative young women. Get out and do this kind of thing. Fiedler would be proud of you. Setting this up, it's a pleasure to be here and to help support this effort this morning. I'm Professor Donna J. Cox. I am director of the eDream Institute. eDream stands for Emerging Digital Research and Education in Arts Media. And I'm director of the Advanced Visualization Lab at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. And I am the steward of the Fiedler Endowment, which was established back in about 2012. Within the eDream Institute. And it was established by, as Esha said, Jerry Fiedler and Melissa Alden. Jerry Fiedler was a University of Illinois alum. He supported eDream through this endowment, and he was the principal of Zygote Ventures and currently still is. He is a venture capitalist. He's helped create and grow many companies. He's acted as a CEO, a director, a chairman, an investor, and an advisor. Fiddler, founder of the Wind River, was the founder of Wind River and was CEO and chairman for 23 years. Now, Wind River is probably on the phones and these computers and everything that you use on a daily basis. It is a device software and it runs on the internet. In fact, the internet runs on it. It has many, many millions of devices connected to it. Cars, the electrical power grids depend upon it. And this device software is used by NASA to enable all of the rovers on other planets, as well as automated space flights. So that was Jerry Fiddler's first claim to fame. Jerry called himself, as a young man, a dilettante of trying everything. He was a student at University of Illinois with some classes as early as 1969, and he took chemistry and graphic design. And then in 1970, he was a student at the Art Institute of Chicago in photography and tried his own business, building his own business a couple of years as a photographer. Then he joined this campus at University of Illinois and took geology and music and photography and ended up getting a Bachelor of Arts in 1975. He studied Miles Davis. He studied avant-garde, the emerging computer music that was born here at this campus. He studied dance and art. And then in 1975, he entered as a graduate student in computer science, and he excelled in everything that he tried. But he didn't necessarily make great grades, ironically. He was more interested in being driven by curiosity and trying new things and trying everything and thinking out of the box. And he did get his master's in computer science in 1977. What excited him was in college, as a college student, was the emergent computer music, Buckminster Fuller, emerging computer graphics that was hardly anything at that time. He was here during Plato. He was a political activist, and he played in a band. I've known Jerry Fiddler since 2012, and he helped to kick off the NCSA Students Pushing Innovation program called SPIN. And SPIN is now directed by Olena Kendratenko and is an important NCSA student intern program. And Olena has been responsible to help support the efforts here with Design for America students. Jerry dedicated his life to helping creative people, and in particular, he enjoys supporting the students who think out of the box through his endowment gift. He believes that students should start thinking early about solving big social challenges in the world, and that these efforts will take an interdisciplinary collaborative thinking. It'll take a design thinking and working with others. For example, we support through the Fiddler Endowment, a Fiddler Award of $10,000 as part of the Technology Entrepreneurial Center's Illinois Innovation Prize. It's given to juried students for outstanding creative, innovative, and entrepreneurial thinking. And it is given primarily to students who are interdisciplinary, and often they bridge the arts, technology, and social sciences. I believe that Jerry will be very pleased to support the outstanding student ideas through the scholarships given here as part of the social hack, Rethinking Essential Work post-pandemic. At some point in the future, I hope that it will be possible to arrange a virtual meeting between Jerry and the winners of these student scholarships as part of this social phenomenon, the social hack today. And with that, I will turn it back over to the leaders of this effort, and thank you very much. I'm sure you're going to have great ideas come out of the writings of the students, and Jerry will be very pleased to support this effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. All right.
Okay, so instead of awarding people for their creations, we want to award people who think critically and support their future endeavors. This is our chance to reinvest in the community, and hopefully in the future, we will have non-university sponsors and be able to give money back to community members. On the next slide, we have our list of scholarships. There are 3 long essay scholarships for $500 each, and 1 short reflection essay question, and we will be awarding 5 winners for $100 each. On the next slide, this is the Secret Designer Award. This is for people who consider themselves to use design in their innovation work, but that is not their primary title, or you are newly reframing how you've been using design in the work you've already done as a creator. On the next slide, we have our Designer Award, Designing Your Passion Award. This is for people who are developing passions beyond their title of work or major. You want to add to or transform a system and daydream of different points of entry to take action. Our third award is the Community Designer Award. This is for people who are dedicated to community building and restorative justice. You can also use this to reflect on the communities you identify with and how they sit within intersectional oppression and privilege. And our short reflection essay is, what were the problems discussed? Describe how they have interacted with your life through the pandemic. What did you learn? How will you apply what you learned? Be specific in what you'll do to create the new normal. Once again, you don't have to specifically answer these questions. They're meant for you to reflect on yourself. I would like to remind that you do have to be registered for the workshops either today or tomorrow or both to apply for this award. And all essay questions will be due on the 21st of April. These are our judges who will go through the essays before they turn it over to the Fiddler Committee. First, we have Ajeta, who's a current senior, and she is also the president for DFA. Next, we have Lisa Mercer, who is professor for art and design, and her most well-known work, she's most well-known for her work where she co-developed a tool called Racism Untaught. And finally, we have Isla Lee Harrison, who is the co-director for the HEF Technology and Management Program. So for our first speaker today, we have Nu Gote. He is the co-founder of Dean Journal, and he will be talking about design as social practice, which will be followed by some questions and answers. He did have a family emergency, so we did pre-record this video. Also, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.
All right, so I will be playing the recording from yesterday, actually. So please enjoy. The closed captioning, we did forget to turn on the closed captioning until about 10 minutes in. Please let us know if you would like a transcript of what they were saying.
Hi, everyone. My name is Isha Sharma, and I'm going to be interviewing New Gote from Dean. And he's going to take it off.
Cool. Thank you very much, Angela and Isha, for this opportunity. Really excited. First, I just want to talk a bit about my background, my approach to design, and why I feel design works best when it's at the intersection of social practice. So I am co-founder and creative director of a design publication called Dean Journal, in which the goal of Dean is to democratize the world of design. I'll get into that a bit later. I am also a co-founder of a research design and strategy studio called Room for Magic, in which our goal is to instigate equitable exchange between communities and external entities. That could be brands, nonprofits, institutions, schools. And then in addition to that, I also am a professor teaching at the new school, Parsons School of Design, in which I teach a course called Design Dichotomy, in which looks at the intersection of design and society and places the designer's role within society and instigating change. And so, but prior to all of that, I wasn't initially a designer, or I didn't really see myself as a designer. I started off in the world of brand strategy and brand marketing. I worked for a lot of cool brands doing a lot of cool things. So I worked for Puma, Red Bull, Sonos, and then I ended up going back to school. I ended up going to grad school for a degree at Parsons called Strategic Design and Management, which was all about design thinking, entrepreneurship, and social impact. And really what that started to do was started to help me reframe and rethink about what is the role of design and what is a designer. And so part of that really started leading me down this road of seeking how might design better serve people. And even in my grad program, I didn't really have that fully articulated question or even a way how to approach it. It was just something that sat in my mind that as I was learning about design thinking, as I was learning about design in a more nuanced way, I started to think that there were moments that design had, or design thinking or the process of design had several shortcomings. And one of those things that I identified was that, especially with design thinking, and which design thinking is a very strong tool that is meant to find new ways to engage with different people who may not have a background in design. And so it works really well in bringing non-designers into different design spaces, and also allowing to center the end user within the process of design. But with that, one of the shortcomings that I identified was, as I was sitting in my design program, I was the only Black male person in my program. And one thing that I kept hearing, and I kept hearing over and over again, was this idea of empathy and design being based off of empathy, in which I agreed with, but I identified that there were shortcomings in a model that's only based off of empathy. And because there's only so much you can empathize with someone, and we all come with our filters, as I like to think about it. And the filters is our past experiences, our perspective, our culture, how we were raised, how we were socialized. All these different elements help us to translate data and observations into insights and design. And so even if you come in with empathy like in the forefront, that is still being filtered through your personal perspective. And there's no way of getting around that. There's no way of finding ways to, I guess, minimize that. I guess design thinking does have built-in ways to minimize that, but that's still very limiting. And so what I started to see and started to think about was that empathy is not enough, and we actually need authentic representation in the design process. So not just limiting it to the designer who's translating what the end user wants, but actually what starts to happen when you actually bring the end user into the process, and you actually have the end user and enable the end user and empower the end user to start to think and discover new ways that they can start to insert their change and their value into a problem that needs to be solved. So for DEAM and the way how we approach DEAM, because this notion shows up throughout all of my work. Actually, I'll start with Room for Magic, because Room for Magic, us being a community-centric design studio that instigates equitable exchange, one of the things that we try to do is actually insert community members into our research teams. And by community members, the way how we look at community, it's not limited in terms of race, gender, or geography. It's more of this shared feeling. It's more of a shared feeling of wants, needs, and desires. And that's how we start to frame up communities. And so what we try to do is understand, at least initially, what are the shared wants, needs, and desires from a specific community, and then go out and find people who represent that community, and then actually embed them in our team and embed them in our process. And in doing that, the process gets messy. In doing that, the process can be delayed, but we found that it actually gives us the opportunity to move past empathy and have people who can speak to a community, or not necessarily speak for a community, but at least provide us with more nuanced observation and insights. And the way how that starts to translate into DEAM Journal, in which DEAM's goal is to democratize the world of design, one of the things that we realized that when we talk about design, we've been conditioned to think about design based on outputs. So based on things that you create. So when somebody asks me, and I'm a designer, they'll go, are you a graphic designer? Are you industrial designer? I mean, they don't say industrial designer, but are you a graphic designer? Are you an architect? Are you a fashion designer? And the answer is no, because the way how we approach design isn't from a standpoint of outputs. It's more of looking at the process of design, and which is the process of adding value, and which design thinking lends into that process. And so the process that is based from trying to solve a common problem across a spectrum of people that then leads you to an output. So before an output is able to be created or manufactured, there needs to be a process that helps to identify a solution for the output, in which the way how I sum it up is like the act of adding value, finding spaces and places and moments to add value. And so back to the idea of outputs and objects, because we've been conditioned to think about design from the standpoint of the outputs, we also have been conditioned to also think about design in this, this threshold of fidelity. And fidelity meaning how finished, polished, done is something, right? And so when you're thinking about fidelity and thinking about how finished or polished something is, there is a difference between what you ideate, what you think about, and then what you're able to manufacture. And so part of it, like the iPhone, or you can't see it, there it is. The iPhone is a great example of like design when you look at it from a fidelity standpoint. It's beautiful bezel, the smooth screen. And so we're trained to say, oh yeah, that's design. When you see a Tesla, that's design. Dieter Rams' list of 10 designs, and you see like a beautiful Herman Miller chair, that's design. But the danger in identifying design based off of fidelity is A, you're not even thinking that you're looking at design based off of fidelity, but then B, that means that you're also not considering the resources needed in order to manufacture that level of fidelity. And so what starts to happen is that the only people who get to be called designers are the people who have the resources to be designers. And as we all know, resources aren't evenly distributed across gender, race, geography. There's so many limitations when it comes to actually getting the resources needed to take your idea to its fullest extent, to its fullest expression. And I guess that's what I mean by fidelity, its fullest expression of what you've imagined. And so the danger is that because we look at design from the standpoint of outputs, and then that is tied to fidelity, but then we don't consider resources, then we only consider design to be these specific things, in which design is much more than that. It has many more opportunities to start to engage and start to actually bring in more people who are facilitating and actively taking part in design, but don't get the opportunity or don't even think about their work as design. And so for us, especially for DEEM, we actually explore design as a social practice. And what a social practice is actually an art practice, in which is interesting because we have conversations about the difference between art and design, in which those are also two things that get melded together at times. For us, design, the act of adding value, right? It's a problem solving practice, in which is art is a self-expression. I feel, thus I manifest in a certain way. And so art is usually tied to the artist. But with social practice, what's interesting is that it actually moves past just art from a manufacturing standpoint and starts to look at art as an engagement tool with a specific community, and looks as a means to start a dialogue that's actually occupying not just the space of art, but also occupying a space of society, a space of civil planning, a space of need, a space of social impact. And so we actually look at many different social practitioners who make pieces that are meant to be provocative and that are meant to pull in a community, and also meant to be in dialogue and meant to engage with a community in a much deeper and richer way. And so what we've seen is that design has a couple of things that it's in love with. It's in love with sustainability. It's very much in love with sustainability. It's in love with technology and finding new ways to use technology as a means to create communities and create different opportunities. But what we also saw was that in the popular things that design tries to tackle, it's very limited. And what we've seen is that actually, if we intersect design with social practice, where social practice is all about engaging a community and being actually, I guess, in dialogue with a community, it allows us to actually interrogate and push design even further and say, actually, design doesn't just have to be limited into just transportation and sustainability. It can actually be something that starts to look at housing issues. It can look at gender politics. It can start to look at ableism, and all those things are innately being spoken about in design. But we found that the nuance of social practice and the nuance to be able to take something out of context that then can be examined in a new way is something that actually opens up and adds a whole new breath to design.
Yeah, so that was like a very well spoken overview of design thinking. Just thinking about that, is there, like, can you give us a specific example of when design thinking actually worked very well for one of your projects?
Yeah. I would say that design thinking, so elements of design thinking is embedded in all of the work that I do. But I would say one of the things that I see when I learned design thinking was I realized that, oh, this isn't much different from the work that I've been doing. This just has a specific name and has a specific set of frameworks, which was created by Tim Brown and IDEO, and they've done a very good job in being able to get that out into the zeitgeist, to get people to gravitate towards that. One thing that I do encourage young designers is to find what are your processes and methodologies that make sense for you, and not necessarily just purely inheriting systems from other people. And so our approach is actually a hybrid. It's a bunch of it's community engagement, it's anthropology, it's design thinking, it's like brand strategy, and all of those things come together in a very interesting way that allows us to start to engage past just what like the standard set of design practices will allow us to do. And so in that, one of the things that I caution and what I don't do is speak to clients and say, we are going to do design thinking, because when that happens, because that has happened, and I know now I'm like giving you an example of where design thinking didn't work in our favor, but don't worry, I will come back and make it make sense. This client was excited because they're like, oh, you do design thinking, your studio does design thinking. And I'm like, yes, it's built into our process. And throughout the entire process, this person kept on bringing up design thinking and kept on framing up design thinking as this like end all solution that could solve everything and anything. And I kept having to remind this person that design thinking is not going to save the world. It's not meant to solve every single problem. It gives us frameworks and methodologies to move through problems in a interesting and nuanced way, but there's other ways of doing that. And so actually the way how we end up presenting our work is not to slap the badge of design thinking onto it, but to figure out from the toolkit of different design methodologies and approaches, which from here makes the most sense to create a bespoke model for us to work from. And actually don't even mention design thinking within that, because it tends to become a distraction. But innately, the processes are related to design thinking. And so this project that actually worked out really well was with a big corporate client that was looking to create a after school program for the young creatives. And that was the prompt, like, how might we create the school for the future? And so in that, what really worked well was that we started off with elements that were more brand research, like including like sending out a survey for us to understand what do high school students like, what engages them, what excites them. But then really where design thinking elements started coming in was workshops and tissue sessions, to be able to bring in community members, and actually before we start building anything, to start to test some of our hypotheses, start to put some things in front of them and get some feedback to see what actually works. And then in that, and like I mentioned earlier with the way how we approach Room for Magic, we had a high school student embedded in our team, in the research team, helping to conduct interviews, helping to do presentations, because that person actually helped to be a genuine guide and representative of the community, but not the end all be all of the community, but knowing that we had this person on the team allowed us to pressure test our approach and even the insights that we're getting, and gave us a good gut check. And so I would say like that is one example of really where like design thinking and the notion of bringing in a community and being able to hold tissue sessions when we still were at a prototype phase was very instrumental to helping us create the program.
Yeah, so going off of that, how do you make sure that, like, in the long run, you said that good design works when you're designing with the users, how do you ensure that your solution lasts for the long run?
So the hard part is that as designers, you have your intentions and you have your goals. And your intentions and your goals need to be considered in the way how I consider them is there's the now, right? And then there's the near future, and then there's the long future. And so part of it is this balancing act of how do you balance between them? How do you create something that can have immediate impact? And then how do you start to safeguard, to think about what is the near future and what's the long future? Or this project that we have where it's not even about creating immediate impact. It's really about the long future. Like, how do we become a catalyst to move something, to move towards a direction, because the solution that we're looking for isn't something that maybe it may be an institutional shift that we need. And so really part of our framework when we go into it, and as we're moving towards like ideating outputs or solutions, really there's a series of questions that we start to consider. And so one of the things that a process that I enjoy thoroughly is I adapted, it's called the Blue Ocean Strategy. And the Blue Ocean Strategy's goal is, that's more of a business framework. And what it's meant to do, and it's a series of business frameworks actually, but what it's meant to do is help you think beyond the obvious and help you lean into limitations and use limitations as a means to create a unique value proposition. And so the whole idea is that if you're in a blue ocean, that means that there's not many competitors. If you're in a red ocean, there's a lot of competitors. And so in one of the frameworks that I really like, you have an X and Y axis, and your X and Y axis can be like, let's say your X can be time, right? So like it can be immediate, near future, like way out, far future. And then your Y axis can be the solutions that you have. Let's say we have 5 different things that we want to prototype, right? So then what we end up doing is, okay, well, for prototype A, what's the immediate impact that we're looking for? And then we go down like, okay, well, what's the impact that we're looking for in the near future, and then in the far future? And basically being able to have that process of then actually thinking through all the solutions based off of time frame helps us to then narrow down to say, oh, actually, if you look, because then by the time you're done with this session, you have a board that has all your ideas that were initially, let's say there's just 4 ideas and 3 different times. Now you have 12 ideas, right? And then from there, you can actually start to pick which ones you think would be the most viable to move forward with. But that's just another example of a filtering tool that we use to help to make sure that we're thinking about things beyond just the immediate impact.
So another thing that came to mind was like in terms of good design and making sure that everyone in the community is involved. Is there a specific scale to when it's still considered good design? Like when does it get too big, or it's really messy that it doesn't turn out good? Like the results or the process, like you mentioned, does not end up in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things is, I try to move away from the idea of good design because it's all relative and it's all based off of the needs, wants, and desires of the end user. And so the trap with good design is that good design can look good, it can feel good, but it may not actually be impactful. And where I've seen good design that doesn't look good, but it is the solution that it is the best solution to move forward with. And so one of the things I would challenge everyone who's even listening right now is to audit what are the values that you hold that are important to you that then create what is good design. What is good design for you? What is good design for the way how you process things? Because I feel like what happens is that the idea of good design just starts to cut out a lot of people. It starts to just push a lot of people to the wayside because they don't feel that they are living up to this idea of good design. But the reality is that there is no such thing as good design. And one of the conversations I often have is, what's the difference between a designer and a native craft person, right? So let's say if you are in a more developed nation and you go somewhere and you go to a store and you're like, oh, let's say it's coasters. These coasters are so well designed, right? You're in the MoMA gift shop and they have like a Keith Haring coaster that has felt at the bottom of it, and it's like his doodles and his art, and you're like, oh, this is great design because you're in the MoMA gift shop. And now let's say you're in a more developing nation and you're going around to some of the stores that are there, and you pick up, maybe it's made out of wicker, and you're like, oh, like, look at these coasters made by craft people, right? Like these. So then all of a sudden what happens is that because of the context of where you are getting this item from, your mind, we've been trained to think that, oh, well, good design happens over here, and then anything that's not over here is like considered craft, or it's considered to be like artisan, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It's all based off of the perception that we've been trained to think about. And so to answer your question regarding what happens when design gets messy, scale definitely is a factor that plays into that when things start to get really, really big. Because the reason why scale is important to consider is because that means that you have a lot of different stakeholders you have to satisfy. And the more people you bring into the fold, the more considerations and the more nuances that you have to build for. And so it is really, really, really hard to try to solve a blanket problem for everyone. It's just like that really starts to move you into a space where there are pitfalls that you have to consider, because then if you're trying to design for everyone, who are you actually trying to design for? So I would definitely say scale is one thing, but I think even more important than scale is intention and alignment between the stakeholders and the community that you're engaging with. And the reason why I say that is that the stakeholders are often the clients that want to engage with a specific community. And they may, even though their intentions mean well, and they mean well, in the way how they're framing up what a solution could be, it could be very limiting. And it could also lead to an output that looks good and that may sound good and it's press-worthy, but the actual function of it is harmful. And part of the design process is also to uncover when are things that we're doing could potentially be harmful, because there's things that you intend on, and then there's unwanted consequences that I think that we're all susceptible to. Any and every designer, or anyone who's producing anything, you will create something that was meant for one thing, or you will say something, like even if you tweeted something or put something on TikTok that you meant this thing, and it could be read in this other way. And so I think those are besides just the scale and alignment, is just looking at like intentions and how might we ensure that our intentions are clear and that we actually stick to them. And the way how we tend to do that is at the beginning of any engagement, we have our values, like we co-workshop. What are our values going into this? What are the desired outputs? And so what usually happens is we start to get a good understanding of where the stakeholders are and if we need to invest more time reframing or helping to coach to get to a point where we all feel like we're aligned in terms of value and intentions before we set off on the project.
So does that kind of go into, well, when you're working with your clients, would that kind of go into facilitating versus teaching, would you say? Could you talk a little bit more about the differences and how that works?
Yes, yeah. I would say that's a great question, because that is something that's in the forefront of my mind, especially with me being an educator. I found that the approach that works best for me and the way how I work is less, even though sometimes clients come to me and they're looking for an answer and they're looking for me to produce an answer for them. I also found that it works best that I move away from a space of being an expert and moving more into a space of being a facilitator. And what that means is actually finding different conditions that will allow them to best land at a solution that makes sense, right? And so that tends to look less like me telling you what we need to do, but more me setting up scenarios and workshops and processes that we all can go through together. And I will guide that in order for us to better understand what the output should be and how the output should function. And so whether it's from an education standpoint or from a client standpoint, I think it's key to find moments to reflect and see how might you be more of a steward, be more of a facilitator than being the person who's always just leading the design and shaping the design.
So then there's also something called proactive versus reactive design. Can you talk about the differences and which one is better, essentially?
Mm-hmm. So I guess once again, I try not to think about things in terms of, because and think about things in terms of what's better or worse, because each situation demands a different approach. Each situation has different context. And so I think every opportunity, one thing we try to do is really get an understanding of the context. So that means getting an understanding of the community, like what are global contexts external things that may be affecting the community, and then getting an understanding of the actual stakeholders, who's signing off on this, who are we engaging with. And I mean, in the best case scenario, the community is always a stakeholder, but the person who is funding the research or the design is one of the primary stakeholders. And so it honestly depends. So from a proactive standpoint, right, that's looking at more preventative measures to help to start to find new opportunities to reimagine existing things. So that's why it's weird, because in order to be proactive, something has to prompt you to be proactive. So which means that you're still being reactive to something, right? And I think for me and for the way how I like to frame it up, I actually like to use reactive opportunities to reframe them to be proactive. And so one of the examples with that is the current, let's say the murder of George Floyd and the current wave of like Black Lives Matter and a lot of institutions that want to engage and support. And so one of the things that we found this year or last year is that people would reach out to Room for Magic or even Deem and would be interested in helping to navigate and figure out better ways to be much more equitable when it comes to the Black community. So that would be an example of reactive, right? They're reacting to a catalyst of a murder of a Black man that then has now moved that conversation into the forefront of all of our consciousness. But what we have done and what we tried to do, because one thing that we're very conscious of is that just because we are Black and we have a studio or we have our publication doesn't mean that our publication is only for Black people, and we don't want our identity to be the main thing where like, oh, we need to get a Black person for this. And they're like, oh, look at that, check. Like we can be designers and our identities definitely do play a factor into our work. But what we try not to do is to allow that to be what navigates and allows people to gravitate towards us, or the reason why they're reaching out to us. So in the reactive nature of trying to find ways to better serve Black communities, what we've done is taken that opportunity to also say, okay, cool, well, let's actually take this moment and help to be proactive, because there's other communities that are suffering under systems of oppression that we can also solve for as well. So we're going into this in a reactive approach, but let's actually use this reactive approach to allow us to become proactive and find ways to build solutions that can help across the spectrum of oppression.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I never heard it, I never thought about it that way. So in regards to that, how does your team specifically approach different problems? Like, are they like going off of current events, or are they doing research to find problems to prevent them? Or can you just speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, hold on, let me just put this thing down. So my team is full of a bunch of people who love research. Like research is something that we nerd out about, we get excited about. And so especially when it comes to the Deem side of things, one of the things that we're on issue 2 now, working on issue 3, we just kicked that off, and everything starts with a pretty deep research phase that pulls from both archival information, because nothing is new under the sun, and the things that we're thinking and talking about, you'll realize like, oh, wait a minute, somebody else has already thought through all of this. And so what we try to do is pull as many diverse references as possible. And so that's very important from us from an archival standpoint, but then also a lot of deep listening in terms of what is prominent right now, who are the people who are adding more nuanced approaches to a problem that we're trying to solve. And so a lot of that is constantly staying in communication and in conversation with people that we see that are moving things in a more progressive way, or even just getting input from people who are currently helping to solve a specific problem. But part of the goal isn't just to focus on the now, it's really to be able to use the past and also the work that's happening now to inspire a new future, to inspire a new solution. And so I think everything starts from the research phase, and the research phase usually just leads us to more questions. We usually start with the question, how might we reimagine education? And then that sends us down this rabbit hole, and we all come out of rabbit holes of a bunch of different more questions. And then those questions allow us to start to reframe and start to narrow down. So it starts off super broad, and then we continue to narrow and narrow and narrow until we at least get somewhere that we're like, oh, this perspective is focused enough that we think that we can actually start to solve for, or we could start to consider it in a way that could output a solution that's viable.
Yeah, so since almost all of us here and whoever's watching is relatively new to design thinking, are there, like, besides thinking of our values before trying to think of or approaching problems, are there any other tips and tricks you have for us to keep in mind?
Yeah, I would say my number one tip and tricks is be yourself, right? And the reason why I say be yourself is that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that we all have filters. Our minds are filters. We take the data that comes in over here, it passes through our mind, and then we output it. And if we all are trying to operate the same way, we won't get new answers, and we won't get new nuanced answers. And so as much as I love to work and hire researchers and designers and strategists who come from a specific background, I usually try to diversify as much as possible. And what I usually do is look in my network and find somebody who may have an adjacent practice that isn't specifically research or designing. And then I tap them and I say, hey, you're gonna run this workshop with me. And they'll be like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, yes, you are. And I was like, I'll show you, because I think that you can bring a nuanced perspective to this. You could bring a new perspective. And the only way we can bring new perspectives is if we lean into what makes us us. So whether you're really into music, you may be really into skateboarding, you may be really into fashion, all of those things, don't lose that, because all those things are super important, and all those things really help to shape what is a design process and what's a design output. And so even with my background, like me coming from the brand side, me like loving music, like I also DJ and produce, all those things are built into how my work manifests. And the reason why we're able to produce new, I guess, more interesting designs is because it isn't squarely us just looking at, let's say we're talking about hyperlocal food systems. Like, in order to start to talk about food, like the answer doesn't necessarily have to come from, well, what are other hyperlocal food systems doing, right? What are other micro gardens doing? Because then I may say, actually, you know what's interesting? Online radio is interesting, because online radio has found a way to create these moments of community that comes together. And then even me understanding how cool online radio can be, I was like, oh, well, what would happen if we took that approach with creating a garden system that's less about the food and that's more about community? Like, and so that comes from me, and that comes from me like loving specific things that fall outside of just design. So I would say the things that you currently already do that are your hobbies and your passions, continue doing them, continue researching them, and try to find ways that you can bring them into your design practice.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Those were all of the questions that I had.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you. They were all great questions.
I honestly learned a lot. Like, yeah.
So awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I can do a quick outro. Thank you very much. This is such a great opportunity. I know this is my second time doing this with y'all, and I enjoy it every single time. And as much as you learned, I also learned, because you asked me questions that no one has asked me yet, and I had to think about it in a way that makes sense for this conversation. But overall, I would encourage everyone, if you have an opportunity, to get your hands on a copy of Dean Journal. You can hit me up and I can get you a code for a discount, because I know how it is to be a student. And then, yeah, so if, I'm sure you'll plug my information somewhere. Yeah, cool.
Hi, Isha, come back.
Hello.
Hi. So that was new. He's so wonderful. The journal he mentioned, I have right here. He did talk to DFA with us in October, and I loved it so much. It made my heart so warm. That was the most like actionable be yourself advice I've ever heard in my life. So that was really encouraging, especially me having been through going through DFA for the past 4 years, trying to figure out what I want to do in design. And then I'm graduating soon, trying to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. My God, that's intimidating. So something that he kind of mentions as a theme is one, being yourself, but also that anybody can really do design. He brings on people from different backgrounds to do workshops, and he kind of introduces them, and he's like, hey, you're a designer, you do this. And design is a really fluid term. So Adrienne Marie Brown is this lady on the cover, and there is a link to actually the first article on this journal. This isn't just to like promo the journal, I swear. That's not, well, we have Demon, he's super cool. But actually in this first interview, she talks about how she sees herself as like a designer, and the Dean team, as they were interviewing her, they were like, hey, you do design. This is what you do. The activism and the mindsets that she uses is really compatible, and it's really similar to how we think. And obviously design isn't like a single way of thinking. And so I really encourage you guys to read that article, and if you're just getting into design, see how like everything you're already doing probably already works well into the frameworks that we'll be talking about for the rest of this weekend. Also, that is a plug for our first scholarship. We have some resources for all of the scholarship opportunities on our website, socialhackillinois.com. And if you go on to the scholarship tab, you will see that we have, articles, and we have some starter questions for you to think about. And one of them is that article. And it's because we're like, you're a secret designer. You're all a secret designers. So yeah. Isha, how was that experience for you yesterday?
So I'm going to be really honest. I've been in DFA for a year now, and I finally understand what design thinking really is. Like he explained it really well. I didn't really like working on projects for the past year. Like I understood the process and I understood what we were supposed to do, but the emphasis that he put on how it's really about the process and how you get there, and how you involve your end users to help you get to the solution is really what's important, more than just the output or result that you're supposed to present to your DFA members. So yeah, and then another thing that that I really liked was his point on empathy and how it can be misguiding, and like if you lose track of what you're really supposed to focus on, it's gonna be really messy. You're not gonna get what you want at the end.
Mm-hmm. So, what, if you were to restart learning design, I mean, when I was in, when I first joined DFA as a freshman, I was like, design thinking, this is, somebody's gonna yell at me. This is what I applied to yearbook in high school. I was like trying to figure out what each of our students want from their page on the yearbook. I would like go to the football team and I'd be like, yo, I'm making a page about the football team. what do you want to see? How do you want to be represented? And I just kind of brought that mindset. I was like, what do you want? So Isha, what would you have done differently as you were learning, or what would you have preferred DFA do differently?
I think, like, honestly, this talk with New from Deem really helped. I think it's because, like, he's a professional, really, like, doing the work that, like, he's actually applying it in his life. And, like, seeing the real life example, learning from his experience really helped. Like, it's one thing to do some exercises and like talk to people when you're starting projects and like going off of what the national board like presented to us, but hearing it from somebody else's point of view and somebody who like actually does this for his work, professional work, it's like a different viewpoint. So I guess that helped.
Yeah, through a lot of my work with DFA and similar projects, my favorite part has always been talking to other people about what they do and understanding how they design their own work. That's not how we frame the conversation, but that's what it really feels like. I told you this yesterday, I've had like 3-hour-long conversations with interviewees, and I always come out so energized afterwards. And I encourage anybody who's starting out in doing kind of design work or integrating it into their whatever work that they're trying to do, whatever projects that you're trying to do, to talk to people, being affected, talk to community members who are really experts on the issues that they may be and challenges that they may be facing. Okay, so we have the next talk with Lou Whitting in about 10 minutes. I realize that the YouTube is delayed, so maybe we'll get started in like 5 minutes. But our next talk is on co-creation and facilitation. I'm just gonna throw on some elevator music, stand up, and get yourself some breakfast if you haven't already. And we will be back soon. Sounds good? Vidisha? Okay. Let's figure this out. If you're here on the chat right now, thank you so much. It means a lot. Let's play some. Do you know of the Data Waves, Isha?
The what?
Data Waves. They're a local band actually in the Champaign-Urbana area, or at least they were here. I don't know if they might have graduated already.
I haven't heard of them.
Let's see. Just gonna leave this on here for a little bit. Oh wait, let me turn on the music. Hi, Lou.
Hello.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
Harry, turn on your camera.
I know, I'm sorry.
How are y'all doing this morning?
Good.
All right, let's get going. I'm gonna hide away, and then Terry, you can introduce Lou, and then get started.
All right, cool. So hello everyone. I'd like to welcome Lou from Agency. She will be discussing what it really means to co-create with communities and how that looks with her work. So welcome, Lou.
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, it's a rainy day here in Urbana. How's it over there with you?
Boston is beautiful today. It's sunny and I think it's supposed to hit a high of 75, which is
Beautiful.
kind of wild, but definitely excited about the sunshine. So
Jealous. Okay, so first question I'd like to get you started with. So what does co-creation mean with Agency, and like what is it exactly do you do at Agency? Just give us a quick rundown about you and like what your work is.
yeah, sure thing. So Agency is a design consultancy, and particularly we use design to reduce structural inequity. Most of the clients that we work with are in education or healthcare or criminal justice. And with criminal justice, it's particularly been juvenile justice and a lot of work with like diversion programs. And so what we do is we take, design approaches, very much ones that are used like in the corporate world. My director, the founder of the firm, was originally at Continuum, is where she did a lot of her design work originally. And so taking kind of the design approach and applying it to social systems. And we really focus on like, what does it mean to have systemic impact? What does it mean for the folks who are like have impact in a system, who have influence in a system, to be able to make change through design. I at the firm am a designer, so on part of it, I do like graphic design and visual design when that's needed, but I also do a lot of facilitation work. And when it comes to like co-creation, co-design, and facilitation, that's both designing the experience of a co-creative workshop or a co-creative series of workshops or whatever that looks like. And also like facilitating that experience, being there to help folks actually move through doing co-creative work.
Cool, very nice. Is there like a specific example of like a project you could share with us? You said you did juvenile work or worked with juvenile systems.
Yeah, let me think. So in that area, this past summer, we did some work with a program in the city of Boston called Summer of Hope. And it's run with the city of Boston, and it's a diversion program for youth where they are actually paid to do like workshops with colleges and organizations throughout the city over the summer. And so for one of those weeks, Agency, we worked a little bit with Lesley University here in the city, but we did an activity with youth where we mapped like their neighborhoods. We thought about what does it mean to do mapping work and system mapping work. So both from like a geographic perspective, but also like an experiential perspective, and talking to youth about their experience living in the neighborhoods that they live in, and how just how that impacts their life and things that they've seen. So that's one area. Another example of a project that might be a little bit more typical. Let me think. And then more like in the education area, which is kind of where we focus. Right now, we're facilitating some work with a school district, helping them figure out their strategic plan and moving the district level folks, both community partners and folks who like work for the school district, through what does it mean for us to like create a 3-year strategic plan on kind of a tightened time frame, and what does it mean for us to engage the community in actually creating that strategic plan as we center like Black and Brown excellence in education. So, a couple different flavors of workshop that we do.
Amongst all those projects and all your experience, what has your experience been working with the community, and like going through the design processes? What was it like having like let's say a non-design organization, like a nonprofit or a school, like having a hand in that design process? Like, what does that interaction look like?
Yeah, so when we do co-creative work, when we facilitate co-creative work with other organizations, with other communities and systems, really the role that we take on is that of facilitator. How can we set it up for the people who are, in it doing the work to continue to be the ones doing the work, right? Like, so we're not coming in here and being like, we're gonna design with you and for you. We're very much like, let us like figure out how to set it up and give you the tools to do this work. What that means often is that both from like past experience on the team, but also through like doing work with these different areas and groups of people, we develop a lot of like knowledge just from being immersed in like being able to speak the language, say, of like an educator when they talk about, IEPs, or they talk about other like specifically education related things that we are able to like be there on that level with them and talk to them about it. So
It's like through empathy, you're able to understand like the place they're at, and
yeah,
it's
so
like
it's
more like a guide.
so it's very much like, how do we take our design process and make it something that speaks their language, right? So we're not trying to get them on board with like, here's how we do it, and we want to pull you into that. It's how do we take our tools and set them up in a way that we really believe and we really see like really meshes with the process that you are currently engaging in, and the work that you are currently doing. How do we take it and package it in a way that is for you?
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, it's like you serve as a guide, and that's what leads them to being empowered to continue to make change in their own way for their own purposes.
And it's often not like a big shift, right? Like, so much of design is not like some really complex thing that like you have to kind of figure out. It's like you take that little like paradigm shift of like, let's approach from like an asset-based approach, or like, let's come up with a lot of ideas before we narrow down to one. It's pretty it doesn't take a lot, right, to get folks to see, oh, hey, that might be something that works a little bit better or helps us with this particular approach.
Yeah, it's more or less like a starting point, and then you just let the ideas come naturally and develop just as any other process in problem solving. Okay. So I imagine agency, just when starting a process or a project, they're already open to the idea of letting go of like, not more or less, not to say power, but more of like their influence, and just totally trying to sculpt that their partners to processes themselves. Okay.
Yeah, it's very much about like, when we show up, it's not about like, what is our vision for the work that you're doing? It's what is your vision for the work that you're doing, right? We are here to help like communities and help with empowering communities, and to come in from the outside and say, here's what we think you should do, is very much not not what it means to make sure that communities are being served by their systems, and that systems are serving the folks within them.
So with that said, what is it like when the people you're working with like aren't like the end users, or you're not designing for them in particular? I imagine you already have experience, especially with designing for children, but you're working with adults.
Yeah, so it varies a little bit. One thing, kind of in the vein of what I mentioned, like that we are handing this design process to, say, like community leaders who are then serving their community. So even if we are not the ones who are directly working with the community folks, in the processes that we engage with the community leaders, we're intentionally making sure there are ways for them to be working with their community folks, right? So if we are doing design within a team of people, I'm trying to think like hospital administrators, right, who are working to make change in a particular department, working in ways for them to be talking to patients or to be talking to families is one way that that work of like, we're not engaging with the end user, but hopefully the folks who we are engaging with the end user. There's also, you mentioned like working with children, right? You know, so thinking about what does it mean to work with folks who are not necessarily, you know, like as capable of fully engaging in this whole design process. And I think, again, it's thinking about like what level are you able to meet people at? How do we think about ways in which to engage, like who do we engage, who has power in that situation, right? So
yeah, and then you have to have faith that that person, like the community leader, is able to actually speak to like as close as the truth as they can, in hopes that they have a good understanding of their own community. Okay. Has that ever been like an issue before, to where you notice any dissonance between a community leader and the entire team, or the people that you were trying to design for and empower the leaders to help?
that's a good question. There have been times when there have been teams of people that we've worked with where there's been dissonance like within a team, and very much the role that we are in is not one of like, we're going to step in and solve all your problems for you, right? You know, these are things that the folks who we come in to work with are very much like responsible in their own right for. So we will support in whatever ways that we can, but I don't think I've ever seen, I don't think we've ever worked with a team of people who are like actively working against the interests of their community, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. It was just out of curiosity. I feel like it would be important to acknowledge the dissonance.
It's not hard to see when things are not aligned, right? It's very much like, as you get into a project where like the work that you're doing is not aligned with like what the end user really needs, particularly at least in this area of like social impact design. In my experience is like throughout the process, you can kind of like feel that something's off, right? So being attentive and trusting your gut is important.
Yeah, that would like, so like that, just so I could understand, in case if there's any confusion, usually that doesn't like have a direct negative impact. It usually just ends up resolving itself. Like it's not something you would actively try to solve while solving the community's issues.
No, you know, if a team that we're working with is like not functioning, or like, you know, having internal issues, it doesn't always get resolved, but at a certain point we end up just not, it becomes clear that like the work that we're doing and hoping to do with them is not necessarily useful to the things that they need to be doing at a given moment. So we kind of step away. One of the things about working with communities, again, is being adaptive and being there for what it is they need. But if it gets to a point where like they are not, you know, it's not meshing for one reason or another, it is not our place to step in and be like, we're gonna be your therapists through like resolving all of these internal problems.
I understand. So yeah. So with that, what does good facilitation look like then, and how has it really been demonstrated by like agency? Like any examples you could give us?
Yeah. Good facilitation doesn't get in the way of the work, right? Good facilitation. I remember I was in choir like in middle school, right? And our director, who's also our accompanist, said that like when you have a really good accompanist, you don't notice them, right? You just notice the folks who are singing, the middle schoolers singing on stage, right? And I think it's very similar when it comes to facilitation, right? Like if we can set up an experience that is smooth, where there aren't like a lot of like technical issues, or we're very responsive to solving issues within the moment, and that which we are providing doesn't get in the way of the work being done. I think that's really important to what good facilitation work looks like. Good facilitation is also aware of like power dynamics in a space, right? So like what is my role as designer? What is my role as facilitator? What are the roles of the different people in the room? How do we think about who's speaking more? How can we lift up other folks who aren't speaking quite as much? How do we attend to like all of the different needs and parts of people engaging in work, from let's think about the details to like, what are you bringing with you and how are you feeling right now in this space? So good facilitation honors that, and also like helps move things forward. It's very much like a holding form.
Okay. Pretty much founded on basis of respect and transparency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been moving towards in several of our projects work where like we create the workshop and we just hand the whole like workshop off to like community leaders to then go facilitate themselves. We did that work with a church in Colorado back in the fall, where like we designed the Google slides or whatever they would be filling in, and we trained the folks who were going to be facilitating, and then gave it to them to go like do that facilitation work. So thinking about how do we really like, we can set you up for success, but now we have community members who have like taken this position of leadership, working with peers to actually facilitate that work. So I think that's another way that we think about, distributing power and ensuring that this work is like happening in the community, and honoring that.
It's like a ripple effect, but it consists of empowerment through knowledge and practice of the process.
Yeah.
So with that, this is more like a general question. You could tackle it however you want, especially tapping into all of your experiences. So why design for structural inequity, particularly like when it comes to education or racial injustices? Like what's something like you personally could get out of it, and what's something like that pretty much maybe like on something unforeseen that you've seen like blossomed or has been molded that they think was a positive impact in the community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really truly believe that design at its heart is a really powerful like tool for change, and that design is something that allows for us to tackle things like structural inequity, right? To think about race, to think about ability, to think about gender. Like all of this is built into the way that design functions. It's not necessarily being used in the best way or really fully accessed in a lot of like the ways that say corporate design currently functions, but in saying that we're going to understand our user, we're going to think about like how individuals experience products or experience systems or experience services. The tools that we use with user-based research and testing really have so much space for us to think about the ways in which like things are not working, right? And the ways that things have been built to not be working. And so, yeah, it's almost kind of hard to point at, why design for structural inequity, because it just feels so instinctual, at least in my own experience.
Instinctual as in like, it comes naturally when you start working with a community, or?
Just like within like the design process, right? Like back when I was in college and making toasters or whatever, the questions that you ask for that kind of a process, if you push them just a little bit further, you get to these questions of like, well, why? why do we need the things that we need? Why do we use the things that we use? Who is using them? How are they using them? And the things that reveals about about users and how they engage with things. Sorry, that was a little bit of a vague answer, but
I can understand. It's a big question.
Yeah. Design for structural inequity. The answer that my director gives when she is often asked this question, why did she found agency? I think is also one of in doing work with systems, with corporations, just how naturally it seemed that we could be looking at all of these different points within a system to be making change. That design work, in the spaces where we use it for profit, in the spaces where we use it for, creating products or creating services, just when you see it there, again, push it one step further and you can start to say, oh, how do we actually serve people? How do we actually make change happen?
Yeah, so it's you look at, say, a corporation, you understand, hey, the goal is to make a profit, the goal is to employ people, the goal is to just market, and they're able to flip it on its head, through training, through education, and say, hey, we could tweak this a little bit just so it could be a little more understanding and empathetic towards the user, towards the people that it would probably unfortunately marginalize or discriminate along the way, and then tackle that as its own issue, and then eventually hopefully change the system after doing that multiple times.
Yeah. And then in your question, you had also asked about where I've seen impact of using design for this sorts of work, particularly education. One design tool that we that is really, really cool to see used in any space, I think particularly the education space, is we call it lighthouse thinking sometimes, or visioning, right? Of when you think about where it is that you want to be 5 years from now, and then backcast from that of in 5 years, all of our third graders are going to be able to read, or in 5 years, every student is going to feel safe at school, and then step back from that and say, what are the steps to get there? The difference between doing that and then versus what are we going to do next year and the year after that and the year after that? Just the trajectory that you get is something really, really incredible. And it's something that folks use in consulting work often, right? Continuum employs that a lot. But when you take that and say not just what do we want the vacuum cleaner to do 5 years from now, but what do we want our school system to be doing 5 years from now? What do we want our classrooms to look like 5 years from now? What are students thinking and feeling and able to do? What are teachers doing? That's been a really, really powerful tool and a really, really great way that design has been a lever in education work.
Okay, interesting. So backtracking from a goal that you envision makes it more clear what the steps are necessary to take.
Yeah. When we let ourselves think big and think without limitations, which is a hard thing to do often, right? For people, if we're talking about the education space, so often overworked, really tired, and thinking about the things that are in front of them because they need to get that work done. To help folks be able to let go of the but we gotta do this, we gotta do that, it has to be this, and just say for a couple minutes but where do we want to be? What could it be if we let it if we didn't have these things holding us back? It's a very, very powerful thing.
Okay. So with that being said, thank you for your time. Thank you for all the answers. Just not sure if anyone will have any other questions, or if there's anything that you'd like to leave us off with that you want us to stick to stay in our heads, or would like to just keep in mind as we practice design and try to make social impact.
Yeah. First of all, it's really incredible. Thank you for inviting me today to be here. That's been the previous speaker knew was really, really great. That was an awesome talk, and I'm really excited for, everybody else who's speaking the rest of today and tomorrow. I'm envious. I wish I could have put on an event like this when I was a student, for sure. Advice, parting words that I might leave you with is just to keep asking questions in your design work, right? Like, particularly when it comes to talking about inequity, right? When we get to a point of like, let's think about who our user is, like, don't stop at like accepting what might be a stereotype or what might be like just kind of assumed to be true. If you see something that you have a question about, like, keep asking those questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
if it comes up, like if you see like something that just sort of seems like it makes sense, but it isn't considered evidence, just take the extra step and just do the research.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And keep that dialogue open too, right?
Mhm.
Like the more curious you are, the more questions that you ask, and the more that you investigate and to keep talking about how do we consider like inequity in design, the more that becomes baked into not only your practice, but the practice that you're sharing with other folks that you're doing design work with. So, yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Angela, got anything to
Yeah,
say?
no, that was great. Good job. Thank you so much, Lou, for coming. And thank you so much, Terry, for facilitating. Terry's also a member of Design for America. And I love him very much.
Thank you. Me too.
All right. Have a good day, you too.
Yeah, take
All
care.
right,
Thank you.
Bye. All right. Next up, we have Ariel Ward and Anisha facilitating our conversation about community and transportation planning. Let's see. I'm gonna put that in gallery view. Hello, you two. I think as somebody who's taught so many design workshops over the past few years, that was a really fun conversation and really helpful to listen to and hear about Lou's experience. All right. Ariel, Anisha, if you guys want to turn on your video. Hey. Is Brittany and the other two going to join?
Oops. I believe Nicole is joining.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
We can wait for another 5 minutes or so for them to arrive. I know we're running a little bit early today.
Okay.
How are you doing, Anisha?
I think our Wi-Fi is there's still an issue with our Wi-Fi since the power went out yesterday. So I'm on my hotspot, but hopefully there won't be any issues.
All right, cool.
Can you all see me okay?
I think so. Okay. Lighting's a little bit dark, but you should be fine. Your background's very cute.
I felt like my lighting was a little dark, but I don't know how to make it any better.
It's not a big deal.
I'll do something most of the time. Maybe.
All right, I'm going to put us on here and then we can chill for the next 4 minutes and then start. Sounds good?
a question.
Yeah.
Nicole said that she tried to sign in, but she got an error message.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me resend her the link then. Can you send me her email to directly add her, invite her as well?
Yeah. It's in the invitation. Put it in the chat.
Amazing, it looks like Nicole has joined. Hi, Nicole. Hey, all right. Sorry for the hold up there, folks. Technical issues as always. But welcome, we're so excited to have you. As you can see, we're talking about community and transportation planning, and we have two lovely members from At the Intersections. Anisha, take it away.
Okay. Hi, my name is Anisha. I'm a junior studying computer science and creative writing at the university. I'm so excited to introduce some of the fabulous folks behind At the Intersections, a publication centering the experiences and expertise of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in transportation. So first, we'll begin with some introductions from our panel, and then they'll be giving a lightning talk on some of their recent work, and then we'll answer some questions with the time we have left. So before you guys get into the talk, I'd like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, your name, where you're calling in from, and anything else you'd like to share about your background or yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Ariel. I'm a transportation engineer with the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. I have a background in transportation engineering and planning. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today.
Hey y'all, good afternoon from Brooklyn. My name is Nicole Payne. I guess as of next Monday, I will be the Director of Transportation at the New York City Office of Emergency Management. I also have a background in planning and urban policy, and I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
Awesome. Take it away with your lightning talk.
Okay, I think. Let's see. Okay, you guys can see my screen, right? So our lightning talk is Plan Like You Care. And basically it is focusing on like a really fundamental aspect of planning, which is caring which is said that you have to have a presentation focused on this, but wanted to talk a little bit more about planning like you care. And so our problems don't happen in silos, and our solutions shouldn't either. And so one of the things that that in the medical field they have is integrated care teams. And so basically when it comes to planning, transportation planning, I'm asking the question as, what if communities had integrated care teams? So looking at transportation like we would look at healthcare. And the reason that you have an integrated care team is that if you don't have someone who's looking at these different aspects of healthcare, then you can wound up missing out on a key part of somebody's healthcare. And so transportation is the same thing. If we look at all of our solutions in silos and not together as one entity, then we miss out on solving some of the transportation solutions that we are burdened with. So building a transportation care team, what does that look like? That looks like thinking beyond infrastructure. When you are focused on transportation, a lot of the times, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, for mobility over modality, a lot of the times, a lot of the focus is on the infrastructure. But in building a transportation care team, you have to be thinking about education, security, health, housing, culture, investment, employment. Transportation helps us get to all of these things. And so it's key to be focusing on transportation as well as infrastructure when you're trying to solve transportation problems. When you're just looking at infrastructure, that's what happens when you're just within the silo. And so another thing that impacts transportation, how people get around. So what we're saying is that infrastructure is not the only thing. So safety is not just safety from cars. When it comes to traveling, when it comes to how you're getting around. And this is from the Principles of Mobility Justice from an organization called Untokening. And one of the things that they highlight is that how your identity also impacts how you get around. So whether you're a woman, whether you're disabled, whether your race, religion, we're seeing a lot of it right now, is that these things also impact the way that people get around when it comes to travel. And so once again, it goes back to, our solutions can't happen in silos. We have to be aware of these different issues and these different challenges that are impacting the way that people travel. And so that's what another element of what it looks like to plan with a care team, because you're taking into account all of these different aspects and experiences. And so these are just some of the different things that have come across my desk as a transportation planner. So the pink tax, which I don't know if you all have heard about the pink tax, but basically they're saying that women end up spending more money on different things. And they found that applies even to transportation. So there's so many different elements for us to be considering as we plan, as we engineer, as we work with communities. And then, Nicole, do you want to talk about mobility over modality?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Ariel. Mobility over modality, I think, is our movement to get people back to the streets. And by back to the streets, I mean thinking about how communities interact with the street, not just move through them, because that's the traditional paradigm of transportation planning. It's moving people from point A to point B. But what happens in between? How do we ensure that the solutions that we're creating to move people within this space are culturally relevant, are what they actually need, rely on or connect to how people associate with their communities, with the public right of way, which is of course sidewalk to street to sidewalk. How do we ensure that the solutions that we're creating, a lot of times, most of the times, funded by taxpayers' money, how do we ensure that it's really meeting the needs of the people that use these services the most? And in transportation, it's evolving away from, a little bit away from, I would say, the like historical background of developing highways. Of course, that still happens, but moving a little bit away from that to this new like active transportation space, which has become the what's a good word for it? I think active transportation has become the cream of the crop for transportation, in the sense that people have assigned a lot of value to it as this is the morally right thing to do. Of course, you know, climate change, we should be moving away from vehicles, but as Ariel mentioned earlier, we have to think about transportation within the context of everything else. If we think about housing, the suburbanization of poverty, people who formerly lived closer to public transit are now being pushed out into the suburbs where they have to rely on cars to connect to their family, connect to employment. So when we're thinking about moving towards active transportation as the default mode, we have to think about how this is in fact impacting the overall mobility of our communities, but especially communities with lower income, and especially our communities of color who have historically bore the brunt of these transportation decisions. So thinking about mobility is more about the whole picture. How do people move about or move within their city easily? How do they feel safe? How do they connect with other people while outside, while using the streets? And modality is a much more narrow view of me as a transportation planner, as a local elected official, as a planner in general. I want you to use this specific mode because this makes most sense to me. But what makes most sense to us is not necessarily what makes most sense to the people who are using these services, right? So there has to be a connection of the two, because planners, of course, and especially folks that are going through school right now, you are developing the technical expertise to design streets, to design mobility systems. But users, people that live in communities, they have the contextual expertise about how they use the streets. So in thinking about mobility over modality, where I'm really asking planners to take a step back and really assess the entire picture of how people get around, how they connect to their family, how do they connect to their jobs, and not assign a specific value to any one mode over the other, just because that is what we prefer, or that is what our textbooks say that we should prefer.
Yes. Thank you. And then Brittany joined us, so I wanted to give her a chance to introduce herself. We just introduce ourselves, where we're calling in from, and yeah.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I am calling in from the Bay Area. I'm based in Oakland, California. My name is Brittany Brown, and I have a background in urban planning, transportation planning, and I'm with these lovely women at the intersections where we really explore what it means to be a woman of color, a Black Indigenous person of color in this transportation planning space. We like opening doors, developing platforms, curating spaces, I'm so grateful to be able to be in community and collaboration with Nicole and Ariel and Margot and Amina. And yeah, people over planning, that is my philosophy, that's our philosophy, and I'm happy to be here. And sorry, I'm running late. If y'all can just accept me in my full humanity. Yeah, but I'm happy to be here and to be joining the conversation.
Awesome. So I guess we can jump into questions now. Thank you so much for that quick presentation, and welcome, Brittany. Of course, we'll accept you. No questions. I guess first, having talked to Ariel previously, I would love to hear if you have any anecdotes or experiences to talk about weighing the balance between community safety and open streets in your work and experiences you've had outside of work.
Mm.
You want to kick us off, Ariel?
I'm thinking.
Okay. I can dive in.
That is a good question.
That is an excellent question, because I think Anisha, the question you asked really touches on the fact that we kind of have to have this double consciousness as Black women, as people of color within the transportation space, where officially in my professional hat, it's like, you know, open streets allows people to reclaim the streets from cars, allows people more, especially I live in New York City, like there just isn't much space, right? So being in the street, that's familiar to me. That's how I grew up. We were double dutching in the street playing soccer. Not me, I was watching, but people playing soccer in the street. It's a great opportunity for people to just have more space to be out and be about. But then connecting that to, again, what it's like to be a Black woman moving around in public space, and then connecting it to this mobility over modality aspect, where we're looking at the whole picture of mobility, not just how buses move, how bikes move, but how where your bus line is assigned to the history of, you know, your neighborhood being redlined, right? I think open streets has taken on a much different like realistic impact than maybe what it was intentionally designed to do. Whereas in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, there are open streets that I just do not feel comfortable being on. Like I feel unwelcome. I think it delves very quickly into, especially for wealthier neighborhoods or neighborhoods where there are a lot of resources and stores. It's like, this is our space. It is not for you, outsider. Even though as a taxpayer, that street is mine too, right? So I think it definitely takes on a different perception, where it can very quickly become, this is ours. Why are you here? And that's not what streets are meant to be. I think, you know, having more space for kids to play, for businesses to operate, people just enjoy themselves is always a great thing. But we have to be very mindful about how this shows up for different people, different communities, especially as we think about the history of people of color, especially our access to different neighborhoods based on whether you look like you belong or not. Mm. And that's something that's not easily quantified, right? In conversations with people about open streets, especially planners, it's very rare. The people that are on this screen, you ain't never going to find no planner that looks like this. No aid planning agency, nothing. That is very extremely rare. And those are life experiences. Those are lived experiences. Those are nuances that are difficult to come by if you have not experienced that yourself. So I think in you know, creating this concept of open streets, I think that there were some things that were missed, right? Which happens when, you know, which happens when there isn't a diversity of people at the, I hate saying at the table, but there are a diversity of people involved in that decision making, because what could feel like an open policy to one person feels like a warning sign to me.
Okay, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think as far as experiences and background, like when I was working at the city of Oakland and the Department of Transportation, and had an opportunity to really think about think about streets and how we might reimagine them. I thought it was important to work with community, and because what I see open streets is a way for really white folks and white planners to inscribe their values onto the street. So their values are no cars. We don't like cars. Take the streets back for the people. But I think for us, or for people of color, for poor folks who still need cars, rely on cars to get around, those values are not in alignment. There's an economic opportunity loss. There's like a lot of things going on, and so we think it's important to give people one opportunity to see themselves in the street, and that seeing themselves in the street is being able to inscribe your values. So what does it take for you to be able to identify with the street? And it's not necessarily an open street with no cars. It might be a street with cars that allows me to access a parking space safely, with ease of access, right? So I think the open streets conversation also wasn't responsive to what was happening. We know that there were essential workers who weren't working from home, and so if you close down my street and I need to get to work, that's not in line with my lived experience and what I'm dealing with right now. During the pandemic, I'm not working from home. You know what I'm saying? So I think it was the open streets and the community safety piece that was it was in alignment with a different set of people and their lived experience versus what folks of color, essential workers were facing. And so that lack of responsiveness and that lack of seeing people, being able to plan for a multitude of people rather than just one set of folks who are highly privileged is really disturbing. It's really disturbing, and it's not productive for our communities. And it doesn't lead to safety, right? Like people feel even more vulnerable not having streets that respond to their needs, that stress them out. You know, like I was driving on the open streets and what it means in Oakland too, like being in Oakland and seeing it in certain communities. It's like, this doesn't resonate. This is just confusing for me. So our planning solutions definitely tend to be kind of one-sided. And to Nicole's point earlier about, that lived experience, we really need to be planning for everybody, and everybody accesses the street differently. And we just don't do a good job of that in this industry. So I'll stop there and open it up.
That's amazing response. Ariel, did you want to weigh in too?
No, I think they covered it.
Awesome. This, I think, is a perfectly summed up answer also in this point of like access is a barrier to entry in regards to how people engage with their communities. Are there any other conflicts or nuances that come up in this kind of conversation that I know you put up the slide about the untokening, that they talk about mobility justice. Is there any other angles that cut in here that you think about in your work?
I mean, I think transportation is unique in that it involves all of the angles. Again, being in a perspective where like I'm a very like East Coast person. I live in New York. It is impossible. The ableism in New York City in a built environment, I don't understand how, like, I don't understand how the city still has money from not being sued, to be honest, because it is impossible to get around the city if you use a mobility device. If anything, even if you are a mother with a stroller or a caregiver with a stroller, it is impossible to get around the city. It is impossible. It's impossible to do so. It just was not built that way. And there are so many people, especially as we as humans begin to live longer, that it's just like there's so many people that are excluded from the city because of the city's lack of access for people that are using mobility devices or people with disabilities. That's something I think about a lot, and just a very base, like, how do you expect me to get to work if there's no elevator at my subway station? Like, it just doesn't, the math isn't adding up. There are very few subway stations in New York City that have elevators. They're placed very far apart, and elevators are extremely difficult to upkeep in terms of maintenance. So they're always down. It's just a very base thing that just does not make sense to me. So there's so much of the city that's off limits to people because it just wasn't designed for them. It also connects to, I mean, for me, of course, like, I see race in everything because I'm a racialized person. So, there are a lot of cities across the United States that are facing displacement and gentrification. So what does that mean for people who, again, living in New York City? The majority of people rely on public transit. But if I have to move 15 miles out to the suburbs, inner ring suburbs of New York City, I can't walk 1 mile to a bus stop. Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? And it just doesn't, it's I don't know, the default in planning is always whiteness. It's always upper income whiteness. And there are just so many aspects of our cities, of planning, that just do not connect to people who do not fit within that description. And that's the majority of us, right? So it connects to everything. Safety, as you mentioned, not only like personal safety from car violence, but also state violence. Right? If I'm walking around and there are, cops doing a patrol, I feel like I need to cross the street. So there is just so many things that are related to transportation. I think anything that you think about in terms of living in a community, there's some aspect that touches on mobility and how you use the street, how you see the streets, as whether like this is a place for me, this is a place that I'm invested in. And again, it's like we're all paying taxes here. Even if buying something from a restaurant, you are paying a tax, so you are entitled to the streets of your city. But it's not designed that way, and our policies do not create the sense of belonging for so many people. So that's a long way of saying I think everything is connected to transportation, justice in all forms, or injustice in all forms.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think as what does it feels like, how can we offer like a radical vision? Like, what is the opposite of this? What does envisioning a future where we're in it and we're thriving and we can access the street safely and experience joy in it. While Nicole was talking, I was like, oh yeah, folks who use mobility devices, like they should be the ultimate data point. Like, we didn't build the streets for you, and you're still accessing it. That level of resiliency and innovation in accessing spaces that aren't meant for you is, beyond my imagination. At the same time, as a Black woman, streets aren't planned for me. And how do I navigate them in a way that responds to my safety, even though they haven't been designed for me? And so when Nicole was saying, yeah, like, I see police, I cross the street. There's no lighting, I cross the street. I'm not illuminated. So I need to find a space where I'm properly illuminated. I know at a certain time the street lights cut off. And so being able to tap into those communities and those people
that have been able to access their home, their families, cultural centers, places of worship, on sidewalks, on streets that weren't built for them, are the ways in which we should be planning. And so what does that look like? I also think moving away from, we need to ensure that we reach out to as many people as possible. Like, can we just do a good job of connecting with some people, with a few people, and really tapping into their experience? And I think what we do at the intersections and just our planning philosophy, our planning praxis, is provide that space, offer that critical analysis, and kind of dig into dominant planning discourse. Like, we absolutely need to do the opposite of what has happened over the decades, and not reproduce those same kinds of projects. And when we talked about this over and over again about what bike lanes, what they look like, and what they might look like 20 years from now, when we see the networks and how they kind of cut through communities. They're not freeways, but the ways in which they've been planned over communities, around communities, through communities, same footprint, same act of violence and erasure. So yeah, I'm happy to be talking to future planners who hopefully won't recreate and reproduce those same kinds of practices. I think it is hard to be like, oh yeah, I'm a person of color, so I don't bring that same energy. But if we're not challenging what's happening, we can bring that same energy, just with a different face that can talk to the community, but sell these ideas. We're not selling ideas, we're about co-creating with community. So I think that's at the heart of the matter.
Yeah, definitely. I think you bring up an amazing point about existing in challenge space that seems to be never ending. And I think you brought up an amazing point about thriving versus surviving, and I want to ask a question about that towards the end. But now I wanted to, since Nicole brought up urbanism versus suburbanism, and we were talking about different points of critical analysis you do at the intersections. In one of your recent articles, you brought up the term, I think Ariel brought up the term urbanism. And I kind of want to talk about that dichotomy that we've kind of touched on, the needs of people in cities versus the needs of people in suburbs. Mm-hmm. So anyone can feel free to talk.
I know that suburbanism, urbanism. I'll say this, and Nicole has stuff, Ariel has stuff. So we living in the suburbs, okay? Like we've been pushed out of the city. The city is no longer accessible, and that really bothers me too. Just that conversation, the values associated with living in the suburbs. Not values, but Nicole, you said it earlier, just with around the active transportation, right? Like, oh, active transportation now, this is an elevated way of traveling. Okay, yes. And I've been pushed out of the city. I have a car. So like that piece, yes, that bothers me, because the city looks very different, and we made the city unaffordable. And so this urbanism, suburbanism, and what does an urbanite look like right now is very different. So I'll just start, but I know my people got something to say about this. Yep.
I've been talking a lot, so I'll let you kick us off, Ariel.
It's okay. It's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay. I have a lot of thoughts about this. My entire family is from Washington, D.C., and literally zero of them live in Washington, D.C. As you all know, it is historically known as Chocolate City, and it is not Chocolate City anymore. We're just pushed out of financially every single urban center. And I use urban as like, density wise, urban center across the entire country. And what does it mean that there's a spatial mismatch between what the suburbs have designed to be originally to keep us out to what it is now, the only place that we can afford to be? There's a lack of, for people that grew up in the city have now moved to the suburbs where, I didn't learn how to drive until I was probably what is known as a little bit older. But some folks just do not drive or cannot afford car insurance, right? Because again, it's tied to this this like financial value system of the higher rate of crime your neighborhood has, the more people of color that live in your neighborhood, the higher your insurance is. But I'm also a person of color that makes less money because I'm a person of color. And I was also pushed out of my neighborhood. And now I have to live in the suburbs and my commute is longer. It's so cyclical. It's so cyclical how these decisions of, urban neighborhoods, of cities in general becoming attractive now versus, 40 years ago when it's like, oh, you live in a city, but now it's attractive to white people, especially, right? So that means that we have to go. That has been what it has meant. And it's just so wild to me that the suburbs were seen as, and we're designed as this utopia where it's like, we can go and be away from the urban filth that exists. And it was, of course, not designed to have access to the city because that's where they were trying to keep out, right? They were trying to keep out us folks from the suburbs. But now that we are living in these suburbs and realizing that the infrastructure that exists does not support the life that we need to lead because of historical disinvestment, but also the need for resources to keep us connected to our jobs, our families, our cultural centers. And it's just I think it's a total disservice for planners to operate in this space and not recognize that, right? I drive a car because I have to. I live in the suburbs. The closest bus stop is 1 mile away. It runs on 45-minute headways. Who was walking a mile to the bus stop to wait for 45 minutes? What if you miss it? It's just so much going on with the suburbanization of poverty, especially, but just the fact that communities of big color are being pushed out into neighborhoods that they built that are became attractive to younger, whiter people that they're now moving into and recolonizing, really. It's just the way that transportation planning does not take that into account is really wild to me. How can we elevate active transportation when the people that need mobility services the most can't even if you want to bike, right? I like biking, that's cool, but I can't even take advantage of it because I live 10 miles out now because my landlord raised my rent 2 times over. It's I think in transportation planning, we often think about the now, like this is what's happening now without reflecting on how we ended up in this position. And it's that history of how we ended up in that position that I think therein lies where our solutions need to be directed towards. It's just a total mismatch now. Not only history, you think about housing and financing. For people of color, it's more difficult to get home loans. So of course, like you have to find the rare apartments that exist in suburbs. But of course, suburbs were built with a lot of single family homes because they didn't want people of lower income. It just, I don't know, y'all. I do not know. I think transportation is very closely linked to housing, especially. And I think this question moving forward of how we serve our cities and more importantly, how we serve the suburbs, right? Because that's where people are moving that need these services, that need public transit the most, but it lacks the infrastructure to have it. I think that's where moving forward, I think that's where transportation planning in general will have to focus our resources and our attention. Intention specifically.
So definitely our intentions. I think that's what we were kind of speaking to earlier is when you are planning or engineering in a silo. And what Nicole is saying is the silo is looking at like urbanism versus suburbanism and not not really paying attention to the needs and how they change as people move from one entity to the other. So yes, definitely just wanted to reinforce that.
Yeah. And if I could just say something about like the 15-minute city, some article that came out, I know we've talked about it as a, as a team, as a collaborative, what that means. And if you can access all of the things that you need within 15 minutes, that's a privilege. That's a privilege, and it's not something that should be used as a planning methodology, because it is a very privileged, you're living in a pretty privileged identity if you can get everything that you need right now, right? Like maybe that wasn't the case 20 years ago, but to Ariel's point about how things shift, and what Nicole said earlier about like the spatial mismatch, our cities are very different now, given capitalism and the cost of housing. So we can't be planning like that, especially using government resources, tax dollars. Maybe if it's a private think tank, you could be thinking about the 15-minute city, but for people, for everyone, right? For the folks where our tax dollars are going, we need to be thinking about, for public dollars, I say just public dollars, we need to be thinking about marginalized identities, and we can't be upholding this 15-minute city. We have to think about people who rely on cars to get their basic needs met. So I just wanted to kind of lift that up too. And these ideas don't, they're seen as, I see them on Twitter. We see them on Twitter, we see them, and then like it becomes a Twitter thing, then it becomes an article, and then it becomes a grant application from my experience, working in government and working in the nonprofit space. They're not harmless. They're not harmless concepts. They then get funded. So we just have to be very careful about the things that we idolize and continue to put on a pedestal. I just wanted to add that as well.
And I would like to add to that point, you brought up the 15-minute city. I think the 15-minute city, in addition to like not being reflective of the situation that's happening now with folks being pushed into the suburbs, it feels like a rewrite of history, where 15-minute cities have always existed, but they were called slums, right? But now that it's attractive to, again, the middle white class, now it's like a concept. Now it's like, oh, this is a thing. Whereas before, people that lived in more urban environments, more densely packed environments, like I've always been able to access these things, but I've never received the resources from the city to support it. But now this is something to work towards now that I can no longer afford to live here. So I think just the idolization, I guess, or you used a better word, Brittany, but of concepts that are really detached from history is something that is too common, I think, in the planning world. Like, did we not forget that y'all tried to bulldoze these neighborhoods, but now this is the ideal? It's weird. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have been talking about a lot of exposed false dichotomies that seem to live in the nuance that aren't talked about in mainstream conversation, like urbanism versus suburbanism and the cyclical nature of all these other material reality issues that come with it that isn't considered. I had one other idea, now I can't remember it. The open streets versus what does community safety actually look like, the symbol and idealization of owning a car because that's the American ideal for independence versus people who actually need to own cars not being considered in active transportation being implemented now. So I wanted to ask one more specific question about false dichotomies. I'm a part of Map the System at DFA, and we're doing research on transportation, which is how we met Ariel. So thank you so much for all of the contributions you've helped us with. But we've come across an article on Streets Blog a couple months ago about the false dichotomy of, in specifically the planning world, about dependent versus choice riders, making categorizations that don't reflect reality, and that there are actually multiple categories of riders that range from people who rarely use public transportation to people who use public transportation as kind of an all-purpose thing, and then people who fall in the middle. So have you seen that ideology pop up in the planning world, and do you think it's right or wrong?
I've been talking a lot, so let someone else go first.
I can start us off. Yeah, I feel like I remember this article, or I remember the dependent and choice riders, and I guess like what's interesting about even that focus on modality, right, and on transit is interesting too. I think that we really do, and it feels so not trivial, but this whole idea of like looking at a person and how they have to move and experience the city is important. And so transit, sure. Shared mobility, sure. Walking, biking, driving a car, all of those things have to be a part of planning. And I don't know if I'm necessarily getting at your question, Anisha, but I guess like what I'm offering is, yes, there are people who are going to be doing a multitude of things to access a city that we've designed that's not for them. And so what does that look like? And this idea of like dependency and this idea of choice shouldn't even be a part of the conversation, because it already creates this like it allows people to be further marginalized within space. So yeah, I'm dependent. Yeah, because you made me depend. I don't know, like I'm a choice writer. What is that as a concept and as an idea, it's just it really that bothers me. Like what are we doing? I don't know. It's funny because I remember maybe not the article, but then this idea, and I feel like since then approaching it from a mobility like framework and approach allows us to get out of this like inscribing value on how people, get around, and further like marginalizing people who are already experiencing marginalization. I don't know if I'm, like I said, I don't know if I'm really getting at the question, but I feel like, yeah, I'm gonna stop there because maybe my thoughts will catch up to me and something has sparked with my folks.
No, I think you definitely are. One point that I think was tangentially related that I forgot to mention earlier was this. I think, Nicole, you touched on this earlier, but an example we saw kind of in our research was this idea of trying to pull people out of cars, like planning agencies pulling people out of cars, like putting plugs on buses, like plug points and Wi-Fi and that sort of thing. Like continuing this idea of like making it attractive to a certain group of people over actually meeting material needs. So that definitely did answer part of that question. That's where I was going with that.
And that's where my, I think, issue comes in with it, where it's, you know, I think the designations are weird, but I think it's even more weird thinking about government resources, which are finite and they're basically are barely any to begin with, right? So until we change our whole tax system, that'll remain the same. But it's like, why the thing with like the Wi-Fi and the outlets and things like that, like that's cute, but I just don't want to stand outside for 45 minutes. Like, can we get this bus? I think it's the focus on people who have options. And that's really what I'm focusing on. It's the focus of the people who have options. So I am very privileged, whereas that I'm working from home right now. So I have the option to not use transit, or, you know, if I want to do a little something fun, maybe I'll use a Lyft to go somewhere. I do not own a vehicle, but that's also because I don't have enough of that, but I have some options, right? There are people who do not have options. And I think of it less of like choice versus dependent versus who has options and who does not. Who, if, you know, their bus decides not to come, won't be able to go to work today, that won't be able to get to work today, won't get paid, won't be able to put food on their family's table. I think it's really the focus of options. And again, with government resources not being, you know, an endless plethora of resources for government, they actually should be focusing our resources on the people who do not have options. Things like Wi-Fi, again, are great. That's awesome. But if there's a decision between, you know, putting Wi-Fi and fluorescent changing light bulbs on a bus versus making sure that people who have the third shift have more frequent bus service, we should go with more frequent bus service for people who work the third shift every single time. It's the trying to attract people who have the option to opt in and opt out of transit. I think in face of those who it's like, if this bus don't come, I can't get to work, that bothers me. Like, we're trying to, again, like going back again to suburbanization of poverty and who was attracted to this urban life that was, of course, seen as like slums 50 years ago, is that we're trying to attract these young white people into using transit. Like, oh, it's cool, it's fun. Meanwhile, like, my mom is trying to get to work, but we are taking away resources from the communities that, again, they use the word dependent. I don't, you know, whatever. I think of it as have fewer options to the people that maybe they are trust fund baby and don't need to work. I don't know what it is, but I think it's that, you know, thinking about the balance of resources. We don't have many. We should definitely be focusing them on not trying to make, I mean, do I need to have a scratch and sniff seat on the subway? That's nasty. I don't know. I said that. It would be great, but we ain't got it like that. And since we ain't got it like that, we need to focus on the people that need it the most, right? And I think options are, there's a range of options, right? If someone drives and they feel like that works best for them, that's great. But for the people who need transit, they have no other choice. We should always, always, always be intentionally prioritizing those folks. And whatever you want to call it, that's fine, as long as they get the resources.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And since we're kind of talking about the public sphere of options versus no options and how that resource distribution plays out, I was curious to know your opinions or thoughts on like private companies like Lime, VioRide, Divvy Bikes, things like that, because let's say, for example, in Chicago, there are certain areas that have way more Divvy Bikes than others. And you know, if someone wants to rent a bike, maybe they'd have to walk 2 miles to find them instead of just having them be in their communities. So I was curious if you guys had any opinions on that.
I was sorry. It's like I just left the shared micromobility space, so I think this is very interesting. I mean, has government always done right by me and my people? Absolutely not. But I think government is the one institution that has the duty to serve its people. Has it fallen short? Absolutely. But it is their duty. It is the duty of government. Private companies do not have that duty. their allegiance is to their bottom line, maybe to their stakeholders, maybe to their funders, which is, you know, they're different institutions, so I understand. But I think in thinking about you know, bikes, or just thinking about private partnerships in general, I think government has to make very clear what their goals are and stand fast to those goals. I worked in New York City when Uber was becoming Uber, and the impact on drivers' income was devastating. These are thousands and thousands of drivers across the city that, again, not able to bring as much food home for their families or even see their families as much because this private institution came in and there was a misalignment in between what the city wanted and what the private companies were willing to provide. And I think government has to take a stand, right? If the public right of way is paid for by the public, hence the name, and if private companies want to operate on them, then they have to meet the standards, the goals, the regulations that are set forth by the city. And I think that should always focus on what works best for the people who need it the most. Right? If I live in a transit desert and there are no scooters or bike share because this company didn't think it would be profitable, what does that mean to me? I need my government to step in and say, okay, we know what you're saying, but if you want to operate, you have to meet these requirements. And I think that's the duty of government, and government should, I understand it could be scary, right? Because Uber has thousands and thousands of lawyers. They are not free to sue cities. I'm sure it could be terrifying, but I think governments owe it. It is their duty to serve people, especially those who need it most. And public-private partnerships, I think they work as long as the city is upfront about this is what we need. You can't bring nothing less than this. Mm-hmm. And also prioritizing the wellness, both economic and socially, of people in the city. Think about like food delivery services where, you know, the people that are actually delivering the food, here they do it on bikes, are getting pennies on the dollar, where Grubhub is like, what are y'all doing? Yes, this is the tech platform. I don't know. And it's a race to a bottom that I think is a misalignment with what the duty of government is. But, you know, if government can figure out a way to make it work for the people, then it's great. But I think it's important that they make sure they set out that standard before entering any partnerships.
Yeah, this is how I met Ariel. As far as when it comes to shared mobility, Ariel was at SFMTA. I was at Transform. Mm-hmm. And this was when the Bay Area was expanding their regional bike share system. And that's kind of what catapulted me into transportation, was just thinking about how to expand this bike share system equitably. And to Nicole's point about government and misalignment and public-private partnerships, it was, all of that was apparent that we did not know what we were doing, because these companies were so massive and had no responsibility, no accountability. And we made it that way. Like, we did not create the conditions for them to come to the table with community in mind. And we didn't have community in mind as we were building these systems. And it was so frustrating to me. Like, you're signing this document to allow for a bike share system or a shared mobility system to not touch half the city, or certain cities. I mean, this was a regional bike share system, and there were cities that were left out of the conversation. And so I think transportation, it just really, it's like the ultimate manifestation of societal, issues. And it plays out like on our street. And so that shared mobility it was like, oh yeah, we have a chance to do something different, and we're still not going to do right. Wait, what? We can literally like we can do better. We can do right. This is a new opportunity here, y'all. And so it continues to play out. Like, we never, even when we get the chance to do good by folks. And that I will say though, what it did do in that moment for me, and maybe this was already happening, but it did bring transportation equity, because I think we were having that conversation. Equity was something that was, people were talking about it. And I think the transportation world hopped on to that as a framework and as a way to plan and do better. So I think shared mobility did give us that opportunity to talk about access. We still have a very, very, very long way to go, but I think that's because it was so apparent that this was creating a new mode for people who could afford it. We were like, oh yeah, we have to figure this thing out. And so then it kind of spread into transit. We started to talk about it when it came to walking and biking, because you saw this, at least for me, I don't know, I just thought about this now as we were talking about it, but we saw this mode where it's like, oh, you could really get left out if you don't have a phone, if you don't have, money, if you don't have if you don't have a reliable cell phone plan, if you don't have a debit card, you can really get left out. But then we said, oh wait, people are getting left out of all modes. And when we really think about it, so yeah, I think that shared mobility piece is really interesting. And we all, like Nicole said, she has a connection to it. I met Ariel through that in the Bay Area. And we need to definitely be thinking about shared mobility and learning from that and how it played out, because it's still a part of, is very much now a part of transportation and mobility.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your response. Ariel, did you want to hop in?
I was going to agree with Nicole on the piece of the public-private partnerships can work. Because one thing that you do see with some of the shared mobility companies is that they're able to do things that maybe we wouldn't be able to do in a normal government entity. And so it's just how do you be in a partnership where you can do that, but also make sure that you're still holding them accountable to the people that you're serving. So, because that is one thing that tech companies do have a little bit of wiggle room. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as much as I would love to keep this conversation going forever, I think Brittany said it right in closing, that mobility and transportation is the manifestation of all societal issues. So in that spirit, since we've been talking about major structures that really need to change to actually service people who need change and need to get more options versus small policy changes that could minorly improve people's lives and standard of living. We've been talking about the difference between where we are in the challenge space now of people just surviving to thriving. So I wanted to ask all of you any final thoughts on getting us to thriving.
I want to get us there. I want to get us there. I think as practitioners, it definitely requires some courage, but that courageousness, in that courageousness, there's community. I've been able to build that community with Ariel, Nicole, and Amina and Margot, and that is where it's at. Being brave and speaking truth to power and challenging the dominant discourse. That is what it doesn't. That I know it doesn't sound light, But it makes me this makes me feel warm inside to know that we are challenging systems. That's what's going to get us there. I know I entered planning because I was where was I? Maybe I was in a classroom. I don't know. But at one point, I don't know where it hit me, but I was like, all these people who plan cities are white men. Oh, hell no. Like we're not doing this. And being able to plan cities, think about cities creatively with women and gender expansive folks is where it's at. And that's what's going to get us to thriving, is being brave and planning in the margins.
I think Brittany said it perfectly.
All right. I think I should wrap it up. Thank you so much, three of you, Nicole, Ariel, and Brittany, for coming. You guys are free to go. I just have a couple notes to anybody still watching. If you are going to be attending our workshop in the afternoon, you should have gotten an email, or I will send you an email in the next hour or something. But thank you to everybody who attended today and listened to all of our amazing speakers talk about their experiences and where we're going to go moving forward post-pandemic, or even through the pandemic. It never ends. All right. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.